Marin had not come to the high hall to be touched. She had come to collect a dead man. Old Warden Halleck had passed in the night, quietly, the way she liked them best, and his body waited now behind a curtain, in an alcove off the great hall, while the court finished some piece of business, too weighty to pause for a corpse. So, she stood against the cold granite with her satchel of cloths and cooling oils and waited, the way she had trained herself to wait, which was to say, completely, without shifting her feet, without any hope at all of being seen. The death tender was a piece of the furniture that suited her fine. She did not look at the beta. Everyone else did. Everyone else always did. He stood near the center of the hall, the way a lantern stands in the middle of a dark room, and the whole court leaned toward him without appearing to know that it leaned. A young lord had drifted so close to his shoulder that they were very nearly touching. Two of the king's own guards had angled their bodies away from the doors they were sworn to watch and toward the beta instead, helpless as flowers turning after the sun. A woman in green kept laughing at things he had not said. It was, Marin thought, a little like watching moths work themselves to death against a glass. Tedious, slightly sad, nothing whatever to do with her. His name was Emeric, and he was the king's second, and he was reputed to be the most desired man in the whole realm. What the songs left out, because the songs did not know it, was that he was also the loneliest, and that only one person in that entire glittering hall could have told you. The second thing was true, she was busy not looking at him. Marin felt the pull of him the way she felt weather. She knew it was there. It did not move her. Somewhere under her ribs there was a place where that sort of thing was supposed to land, warmth, or wanting, or the simple animal wish to be nearer to something beautiful, and that place had been quiet for 2 years now, quiet as the bodies she washed. She had long since stopped waiting for it to wake. A woman could live in the quiet. She was the proof of it. Then the thing happened that the kitchens and the barracks and the washing sheds would be telling for a year after. The beta went still. It was not the ordinary stillness of a man pausing between words. Marin, who had made a life study of stillness, noticed it precisely because it was the real kind, the kind that came over a body when the thing that had been driving it finally stopped. His head came up. The woman in green said something else clever, and he did not hear her at all. His eyes moved across the hall, past the lord at his shoulder, past the king himself, mid-sentence on the high seat, and found the one still point in all that fawning motion. Her. Marin looked back only because it would have been stranger not to. Now that 100 heads were beginning to turn to see what he saw, he crossed the hall. He did it the way water finds the low place in a floor. Without hurry, and without any evident say in the matter, and the court peeled open in front of him in a hush so complete she could hear her own pulse in her ears. The young lord reached after him, and caught nothing but air. The king stopped speaking. And Emeric of Velmark, the most wanted man in the realm, walked the whole length of his king's hall and lowered himself down beside the death tender against the cold wall, and leaned, and went quiet. His shoulder came to rest against her arm. His head tipped, slow, until the weight of it settled into the curve where her neck met her shoulder. And then, impossibly, in front of the throne and the entire staring court, the frantic hum went out of him. She felt it go. She could not have told anyone how she felt it, only that a breath before he had been a wire pulled near to snapping, and now he was simply a large, warm man breathing against her shoulder, like a child who had fought sleep for a week and at last surrendered. Marin stood very still, which cost her nothing, because standing very still was the whole of the art she had. The hall did not breathe. Somewhere a cup met a table too hard. The woman in green had gone the color of ash. On the high seat, the king had risen halfway out of his chair, one hand flat on the carved arm of it, and his face was doing something complicated that Marin could not read and did not try to. She looked down at the top of the beta's dark head. She looked up at the king. She looked, longingly, at the perfectly good corpse, waiting behind the curtain. growing no fresher for the delay. "He is on me," she announced, to no one in particular, in the tone of a woman reporting a leak in a roof. Nobody answered. Nobody seemed to know how. She would learn the shape of the thing in pieces over the days that came after, but she learned the first piece right there, against the wall, from a woman who crossed the hall almost as boldly as the beta had. She was tall and plainly dressed for someone wearing a Luna's ring, and she knelt without a scrap of ceremony and looked at Emeric's slack, peaceful face with an expression that was mostly fear. "Do not move him," the woman said, very low. "Please. I was not planning to carry him off anywhere," Marin said. The woman, whose name was Elspeth, did not smile, though something in her mouth wanted to. "You do not understand what you are looking at," she said. "His wolf has never done this. Not once. Not for anyone. In the whole of the 30 years I have known him, he does not rest. He cannot. And it is killing him by inches." She looked up and her eyes were bright and terrible with hope. "And he has just crossed my husband's hall, and lain down on a stranger as though she were the only safe ground in the world." Marin felt the words arrive, and find nowhere in her to land, which was the usual thing now. "Then his wolf has poor judgment," she said. "I tend the dead." "Stay," Elspeth said. And it was not a request, and underneath the fear in it there was that other thing, the dangerous thing, the kind of hope that gets its teeth into you and does not let go. "Whatever is asked of you after this, whatever you are told, do not leave the keep. Do you understand me?" Against her neck the beta breathed on, slow and deep and even, the breath of a man, 1,000 fathoms down in a sleep he was not meant to be able to reach. And Marin, who had come only to collect a dead man, felt the first thin crack run clean through her perfect quiet, and hated it, and could not for her life have said why the small sound of that breaking should frighten her so. The quiet house sat at the far edge of the keep grounds, where the wind came off the marsh, and Marin had always thought it the most honest building in Velmark, because it did not pretend to be anything. People did not drift toward it. People crossed the whole width of the yard to avoid passing its door. That too had suited her. Iseult was waiting in the doorway when Marin came up the path, which meant she had already heard, which meant the entire keep had already heard. "So," the old woman said, "Warden Halleck is laid out and washed. I will do the oils in the morning." He went easy. In his sleep, there is nothing worth the telling. Marin set down her satchel and did not meet her mentor's eyes. "That is not the part I want telling, girl, and you know it." Iseult had kept the quiet house for longer than Marin had been alive, and there was very little in the way of death or the living that could still surprise her. She had taken Marin in 2 years ago, when Marin had come to the keep gates with a dead sister to bury, and no one left to bury her beside, and she had asked no questions then, and Marin had loved her fiercely and quietly for it ever since. So, Marin told her the stillness, the crossing of the hall, the weight of the beta's head on her shoulder, and the way the roar had simply gone out of him, and the Luna kneeling on the cold floor telling her not to leave. When she finished, Iseult was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat down heavily on the bench by the cold hearth and rubbed her face with both hands. "You know what he is," she said. It was not quite a question. The king's second. "Everyone knows what he is. I mean what he is." Iseult looked up. "There is a sickness in the old blood, rare as a black lamb, that some wolves carry and most never show. The scholars have a long name for it. The rest of us call it the wanting. A wolf born under it draws every eye and every heart it passes, without trying, without wanting to, whether it wills the thing or no. Sounds a gift, does it not? To be loved by all the world." Her mouth twisted. "It is not a gift, it is a noise. Imagine every soul in a room turning toward you at once, wanting, reaching, and none of it true, none of it earned, none of it able to be shut off or turned down or slept through. Imagine that from the cradle. Imagine never once in your life knowing whether a kind word was meant for you or only pulled out of a body against its owner's will. They do not live long. The ones who show it strong. The noise wears them thin. They cannot rest because rest requires quiet, and a wolf like that never ever knows quiet. Marin stood very still in the middle of the room. Somewhere far under the long numbness, something turned over in its sleep, and she did not like it. Until today, Isolde said, watching her far too closely. Do not, Marin said. You went quiet a long time ago, child. I have watched you do it. You walled the whole living world out, because the one door in that wall let too much grief through. I never blamed you for it. Isolde's voice gentled. But you are the first silence that man has met in the whole of his life. Of course his wolf lay down on you. You are the only place in the realm the noise stops. He can find his silence somewhere else, Marin said. I have work. I have the dead. They do not lean on me, and they do not stare, and they never once ask me to feel a single thing. She heard her own voice climb and made herself stop. I came here to be left alone. That is the whole of what I came here for. Isolde looked at her with an old, sad patience. I know it, she said. That is exactly why they will not leave you alone now. The knock came before Marin could answer. It was a hard, formal, three-strike knock, the kind that no one who wished to avoid the quiet house ever gave. And when Isolde opened the door, there was a guard on the step in the black and gray of the king's own household, and behind him, the last of the daylight going down red over the marsh. The death tender, the guard said, not unkindly. Reading a paper he plainly did not need to read. Marin of no house. You are summoned before the king tonight, now. Isolde's hand found Marin's wrist and held it, and for the first time in longer than she cared to remember, Marin was glad of the touch, and hated that she was glad, and that small war was still going on behind her face, as she picked up her cloak and followed the guard out into the dying light. The king received her in a low, warm room she had not known existed, all dark wood and old maps, with a fire going and no throne in sight. She had braced herself for the throne. She found the lack of it worse. King Osric was younger than she had expected, and tired in the eyes in a way she recognized, because she saw it on the faces of the newly bereaved she washed the dead for. Elspeth, the Luna, stood at his shoulder, and in a chair, pulled close to the fire, wrapped in the same wire-tight tension she had watched drain out of him that afternoon, sat the beta. Emeric was awake now. Awake. He was worse. Awake, the pull of him filled the room like smoke, and Marin watched the guard who had brought her sway half a step toward him before catching himself and flushing scarlet. Even the king, she noticed, sat angled very slightly toward his second, the way a man sits who has spent a lifetime not quite managing to look away. Marin felt none of it. She stood in the doorway and felt the pull break over her like a wave over a stone, and she remained a stone. Emeric was staring at her as if she were a ghost. Sit, the king said. Please. This is not a trial. Whatever you have been told, you have done nothing wrong. The opposite, if anything. She sat. Nobody spoke for a moment. The fire cracked. I will be plain, because I have no time left for anything else, Osric said. My beta is dying. He has not truly slept in longer than a year. His wolf claws at him from the inside every hour he is awake, which is every hour there is. We have tried every healer and every herb and every prayer in the realm, and none of it touches the noise, because the noise is not a sickness of the body. He looked at her steadily. This afternoon, for the first time in 30 years, it stopped. Because of you, I would like to understand why, and then I would like, very much, to ask you for something I have no right to ask. It is the quiet, Marin said. She saw no reason to make them drag it out of her. Your beta hears everyone in a room wanting him. I do not want him, so he cannot hear me. I imagine standing near me is a little like a man with a ringing in his ears, finding one silent corner of the world. She glanced at Emeric, who had not stopped looking at her. It is not a compliment to either of us. It is only that I am empty where other people are loud. There was a silence. Then Emmerich laughed, short and rough and disbelieving, and it changed his whole face. "She tells the truth," he said to the king, but still watching her. "Do you feel that? She is not trying to spare me, and she is not trying to win me. I have not heard a person say a plain true thing to my face since I was a boy." His voice cracked on the last of it just slightly, and Marin watched the king and the Luna exchange a look that had years of grief packed into it. "We should test it properly," Elspeth said gently, "before we ask her anything, to be sure." So they tested it. It was almost unbearably simple. They had her sit near him and say nothing, while the lore master who had been summoned, a narrow watchful woman named Fialon, timed it against a candle marked in rings. And Emmerich, mid-conversation, in a chair, in a bright, warm room with 4 people watching him, felt the roar go out of him a second time, and his head dropped, and his breathing went deep and slow and even, and he slept. He slept for the better part of an hour, while they all sat frozen and afraid to breathe. Marin watched the hard, exhausted lines of his face come loose one by one. She watched a man who had been braced against the whole world since the cradle, finally set the weight of it down. And something in her chest, in the walled, quiet place, ached in a way it had no business aching, and she looked away from him and stared very hard into the fire until the feeling passed, or pretended to. When he woke, he did not startle. He simply opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression so unguarded and so grateful that she had to look away again. "An hour," Phelan said softly, reading her candle, and there was awe in it. The king turned to Marin, and now she understood the shape of the thing. He had no right to ask, and her stomach dropped through the floor. "No," she said, before he could say it. "You have not heard me yet. I do not need to. You want to keep me near him like a physician's poultice. You strap on and forget." She stood. "I am not a cure, your grace. I am a woman who washes the dead and wishes to be left alone. And I have wished it very hard, and for a long time, and I have earned it. Marin." It was Emmerich who said her name, and she had not known he knew it. And the sound of it in his low, rough voice landed somewhere it should not have. He had risen too. "I would never ask you to. Whatever he is about to offer, whatever he thinks he can order, I am telling you that you may walk out that door, and I will not stop you, and neither will he." He said it fiercely, and he meant it, and the meaning of it was worse than any order could have been. "I have had enough of people who cannot help wanting me. I will not add one who cannot help being used by me." Marin stared at him. It was, she realized with a slow, cold horror, the first genuinely kind thing anyone had said to her in longer than she could remember, and it had come from the one man in the realm she had walked in, fully intending to refuse. "Oh," she said, very quietly, "that was unfair of you." And she had no idea, none at all, what she was going to do. She stayed. Of course she stayed. She told herself it was for the coin, which was real and generous, and for Iseult, who could use a well-paid apprentice's wage to mend the quiet house roof before winter. She told herself it was for the dead, who would still be hers by day. She told herself a great many things on the walk back across the yard, and she believed almost none of them. And she stayed anyway. The arrangement, when the lore master Fialon laid it out, was made to sound as bloodless as a ledger, which Marin appreciated because it let everyone in the room pretend. The beta could not rest without silence. Marin was the only silence. The noise was worst at night, when a wolf's guard was lowest and there was no work to hold it back, and so, the nights were when he unraveled fastest. Therefore, by the plainest arithmetic in the world, Marin would spend the nights near him. Not as anything, not for anyone to whisper about, as a poultice, as a physician's tool, a quiet, strapped to a wound. "You will have your own bed, and your own screen, and your own door that bolts from the inside," Fialon said briskly. "And if he so much as looks at you sideways, you will tell me, and I will see to him myself. King second, or no. She said it flatly, and Marin surprised herself by almost smiling. The first night was ridiculous. His chambers were larger than the whole quiet house. They had put a narrow bed for her behind a carved screen at the far end, a respectful and faintly absurd distance away, and Marin sat on the edge of it in the dark and listened to the most desired man in the realm lie rigid in his own great bed on the other side of the room, and fail audibly. "You are very loud." For a silence, she said finally into the dark. There was a startled pause, then roughly, "I am sorry. I am not accustomed to being able to sleep. My body seems to have forgotten it is allowed. Try lying down like a person and not a soldier, braced for a spear, a rustle of blankets. Like this, I cannot see you. I am behind a screen the size of a barn door. For all I know, you are standing on your head." He laughed again, that same rough, surprised sound, as though laughing were another thing his body had half forgotten. "Do you speak to the king this way? The king does not lie awake keeping me from my rest." She lay back and folded her hands on her stomach and stared up into the dark. "Go to sleep, my lord. That is the whole of what I am here for. You need not entertain the furniture." He was quiet a while. She thought perhaps it had worked. Then his voice came again, softer, stripped of everything but the tiredness. "They all look at me and see a thing they want," he said. "Since I was small, my own mother could not look at me straight. Do you know what it is to be loved by everyone and known by no one? To reach for a person and feel them reach back and never once know if any of it is theirs, to give a long breath. You looked at me today in that hall, like I was a coat rack that had inconvenienced you. It was the kindest thing that has happened to me in years." Marin lay in the dark and felt the wall around her quiet place shudder, and hated it, and did not answer, because she did not trust what her voice would do. "I am glad someone finds me tedious," Emmerich said, almost to himself. And then at last his breathing changed, and deepened, and went even, and the great bed went still, and the most wanted man in the realm slept like the dead she tended, deep and dreamless and safe. Marin did not sleep. She lay awake in the borrowed dark and listened to him breathe, and she waited for the quiet to close back over her, the way it always did, seamless, complete, safe. She had been so good at the quiet. She had built her whole life inside it. But somewhere past the middle of the night, in the deepest hour, when his breathing was slowest and the fire had burned down to red coals, she felt it. A pull, not his pull. She had never once felt his pull, and she did not feel it now. This came from somewhere else, somewhere down, from the walled and buried place under her ribs, and it was faint, and it was old, and it was answering something. As though across the dark room, from the sleeping wolf who had lain his head on her and gone quiet, some thread had found its way to the one part of her she had spent so long burying, and given it the gentlest, most terrible tug. 2 years since she had felt anything reach for her. 2 years since she had let it. Marin stared into the dark, her heart beating hard and unwilling in her chest, and understood with a cold and creeping certainty that the danger here had never once been his, it was hers. A rhythm formed, the way rhythms do, out of repetition and the body's stubborn wish to go on living. By day Marin kept the quiet house. She washed the dead and closed their eyes, and sat with the families who came, and the work was the same as it had always been, steady and cold and asking nothing of her, and she was grateful for every hour of it. By night she crossed the dark yard to the beta's chambers, lay down behind her screen, and gave a dying man, the only silence in the realm. At first, they had thought distance would not matter, so long as she was in the room. Fielin's marked candles proved them wrong inside a week. The farther Marin lay from him, the lower Master found, the more the noise crept back around the edges of his rest, thin and high like water, finding a crack in a wall. So they moved her bed nearer. Then nearer, again. By the end of the first fortnight, the screen had been folded away, as a polite fiction, that no one had the strength left to maintain, and her narrow bed stood an arm's length from his great one, and Marin fell asleep each night to the sound of the most wanted man in the realm, breathing slow and safe in the dark. She told herself she felt nothing about it, and was believed by no one, least of all herself. He never touched her. She noticed it the way you notice a sound that has stopped. A man like that, she had assumed, would reach, without thinking, the way the whole world reached for him. He did the opposite. He was careful with her in a way that bordered on the elaborate, keeping a clear hand's width of air between them in every doorway, folding his hands behind his back when she came near, and it took her longer than it should have to understand why. He knew, better than any soul alive, what it was to have someone want at you, against your will, and he would sooner die than do the smallest measure of it to her. Other things began to appear. The corridor to his chambers, which had always been thronged with courtiers loitering for a glimpse of him, went quiet in the evenings, and she learned only later that he had ordered it cleared for the single hour she walked it, so that she might come and go without a crowd pressing at her back. A pot of the bitter marsh tea she favored, which no one at the high tables would touch, began to arrive warm by her bed each night. She had never told him she liked it. He had simply noticed, being a man who had spent his whole life reading the wants of others in order to survive them, she began without ever deciding to talk to him in the dark, not about anything that mattered. She told him about the widow who had tried to bury her husband with 3 live chickens and a wheel of cheese, in case the roads to the next world proved long. She told him about the apprentice gravedigger who had opened up the wrong yard entirely and been chased off by an extremely living old man taking the afternoon sun. She told him the one about the 2 brothers and the single coffin, which was genuinely funny and very slightly criminal, and she heard him laugh in the dark, that rough, startled sound, and felt something in her chest she had no name for and did not want one. "You are the strangest comfort in the realm," he said one night. "You tell a dying man stories of the dead, and somehow it is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in years." "The dead are excellent company," she said. "They never want a single thing." A silence. Then softly, from the dark, "Neither do you. It is the same thing, is it not? Why they rest for you, and why I do." Marin did not answer that, because it landed too near the buried place, and she was learning that he had a terrible gift for landing things there. Then came the night of the harvest court, when the whole keep drank and sang and wanted, and the wanting rose in him like a spring tide, and even the arm's length of silence between their beds was not enough to hold it back. He lay rigid and shaking, his breath sawing in his chest, and she could hear him losing the fight, and she got up without deciding to. She had steadied 100 grieving bodies. She knew where the fear lives in a person, and how to draw it down out of them. She sat on the edge of his bed and laid her hand flat between his shoulder blades, the way she would have stilled a weeping widow, purely practical, nothing at all in it, and said, "Breathe out, longer than you breathe in. There, again." Under her palm, she felt the shaking ease, felt the wire pull loose, felt the roar go down and down, until he was only a large, warm man, breathing slow beneath her hand in the dark. And he turned his face into the pillow and said, muffled and undone, "Thank you," and slept deeper than she had ever heard him sleep. Marin stayed where she was, her hand resting on his back, and did not move it, and told herself it was only for his rest. And, in the deep of that night, with her hands still between his shoulder blades and his breath gone slow as the tide drawn all the way out, she felt the thread again, the pull from the buried place under her ribs. Only this time it was not faint. This time it was a hand closing around a rope, pulling gently, patiently, towards something on the far side of sleep, some gray and open country she could almost see if she only let her eyes close the rest of the way. She almost let them. She was so tired of holding the wall. It would have been so easy to follow the thread down and see at last where he went, when he finally rested. Marin wrenched her hand back, as though the bed had burned it. She sat in the dark with her heart slamming against her ribs, staring at the sleeping man who had somehow, past every wall she owned, got hold of the one thread she had long since pretended she had cut clean through. And she understood that whatever this was, it was no longer carrying only his silence to him. It was carrying her somewhere, and she did not know the way back. She held out for 4 nights. 4 nights she kept her hands to herself and lay rigid on her own side of the dark, and refused the pull. On the 4th night, she was so tired, and he was breathing so peacefully, and the thread gave one soft and patient tug, and Marin, half asleep and undefended, let her eyes close the rest of the way and followed it down. She opened them somewhere gray. It was a vast place, and a flat one, without walls or sky, only a low, even light, like the hour before a dawn that never comes. And it was full of people. A crowd stretched away in every direction farther than she could see, shoulder to shoulder, past counting, and every one of them was reaching inward, reaching toward some center she could not yet see, hands lifted and grasping, mouths all moving together in one vast murmur that she felt in her teeth before she understood it as words. Want you? Need you? Look at me. Choose me. Mine. Marin, who had spent 2 years learning every face the dead can wear, looked at the nearest of them and felt her skin crawl, because the faces were wrong. They had no features, smooth and blank and turned all the same way, hungering. And the wrongness of it was worse than any corpse she had ever washed, because a corpse, at least, had been a person once. These had never been anyone. They were only the wanting itself, given a shape and a pair of hands. The crowd did not reach for her. She understood why at once, and the understanding was its own small cold grief. Nothing wanted her. She was empty, silent. A woman who had climbed into a coffin 2 years ago and pulled the lid shut over herself. And so the crowd of the hungering parted around her the way water parts around a stone, blind to her, and she walked through them untouched, toward the center, toward the thing that all of them reached for. She found him at the heart of it. Emmerich was on his knees, the crowd pressed in on every side, hands upon him, in his hair and at his throat, and locked around his arms. Dozens of them, hundreds, pulling him 100 ways at once, and he was not fighting them. That was the worst of it. He knelt with his head bowed and let them take hold, let them pull, and she could see that he was coming apart at the edges, thinning, graying, dissolving slowly into the hands that wanted him, the way the sea wears a stone down into sand. Emmerich. He did not hear her, over the murmur. Marin waded the last of the way through the blind-reaching crowd and took his face in both her hands, which was the first time she had ever touched him so, and it did not feel clinical in the least. Emmerich, look at me. I do not want anything from you. Do you hear me? I am the one who wants nothing. Come back. His eyes came up, found hers, and in them she saw a man drowning who has stopped believing that a shore exists. Nothing here is real. I am the only real thing in this whole gray country, she said, because I am the only one not reaching. Now get up, she pulled. The buried thread under her ribs went taut and burning, and she pulled with it, and his hand closed hard around her wrist, and the gray crowd made a sound like a tide dragging back over shingle, furious, cheated, and then she was awake. Awake, sitting bolt upright in the dark of his chambers, her heart going like a hammer, her hand fisted in the front of his shirt. And Emmerich was awake beside her, upright too, staring at her, his chest heaving, his own hand locked around her wrist exactly as it had been in the gray place a single heartbeat before. For a long moment, neither of them breathed. You were there, he said at last, and his voice was wrecked. In the crush, you walked through them and they did not even see you. He was looking at her as though she were something terrible and holy at once. No one has ever been there. In 30 years, I have gone to that place every time I close my eyes, and I have gone alone. How are you there? Because they do not want me, Marin said, and heard how flat and true it came out, and saw him flinch at the sound of it. Nothing wants me. I am empty, Emmerich. That is the whole of my great gift. I am so hollow that even a crowd of hungry ghosts looks straight through me. She pulled her wrist free. Her hand was shaking. That is why your wolf can rest on me. That is why I could walk your nightmare untouched. Not because I am anything, because I am nothing at all. Do not, he said low and fierce. Do not say that as though it were the whole of you. I have known nothing but wanting my entire life, and I am telling you, you are not empty. You are quiet. They are not the same thing. His jaw worked. You are the first quiet I have ever loved. The words sat in the dark between them, enormous, and neither of them dared touch it. Marin did not sleep again that night. In the morning she went to Isolde and Philonend and told them everything. The gray place, the faceless crowd, the walking through, the pulling free. And she watched the old death tender and the narrow loremaster go very still, and then look at one another. And she knew before either of them spoke that she had said something far worse than she understood. That is not possible, Phelan said slowly. A wolf's sleeping place is his own, and no one else's. No living soul can walk into another's. Not unless what? Marin said. Isolde answered her, and her voice was gentle and full of dread. Unless the two souls are already tied, she said. Child, a bond is forming between you, and it is already far, far further along than you have let yourself know. No, Marin said. No, I do not bond. That is the entire point of me. She was on her feet. She had not decided to stand. Phelan watched her with that narrow, measuring stillness, and Isolde only looked sad, and Marin wanted to break something, which was itself a small horror, because she had not wanted anything at all, in all that long, numb time. The wanting now felt like a limb waking from a long sleep, all pins and fire and unbearable. Explain it to me, she made herself say, plainly. The way the king likes his news. Phelan folded her hands. A mate bond is not built. It is recognized. Two souls that fit find one another. And something older than either of them clicks shut like a lock. It is rare enough in an ordinary life. In his, it should have been impossible, because a wolf, drowning in the noise of everyone's wanting, cannot hear the one true call beneath all of it. She tilted her head, but you make no noise. And so, in the one silence he has ever known in his life, he heard you. And you? She paused. You had buried yourself so deep that nothing living could reach you. But he does not reach like the living. He reaches like a drowning man. And a drowning man's hand finds the one rope in the dark whether the rope wishes to be found or not. There is a price, Isolde said quietly, because Isolde had always been the one to say the hard thing plainly. You have felt it already. Every wall you built is coming down, whether you will it or no. The quiet you have lived inside all this while is cracking. And it will go on cracking, because a bond cannot form around a walled heart. To be tied to him, you must feel again. All of it. Everything you buried. She held Marin's gaze without mercy and without flinching. Including what you buried it for, and there it was. Marin sat back down, because her legs had stopped agreeing to hold her up. Her name was Win. Isolde said to Phelan gently, because Marin could not, her sister. She carried her here dead across 40 miles of winter road 2 years ago and asked me for a plot and a pair of hands, and she has not said the girl's name aloud once since, nor wept, nor let a single living soul close enough to make her. The old woman reached out and folded Marin's cold hand between both of hers. You did not go numb by accident, child. You did it on purpose, and it was the bravest, cruel thing I have ever watched a person do to herself. And it kept you alive when nothing else would have. But you cannot love a man from inside a coffin. You will have to climb out of it. And climbing out will hurt exactly as much as it hurt the day you climbed in. Marin's eyes were burning. She had not felt them burn in longer than she could say. She hated it. She was terrified of it. And somewhere far down beneath the fear, some small drowned thing was so relieved that it could have wept, and that was the most frightening part of all of it. "And if I do not," she said, "if I keep the wall up, if I refuse the whole of it." Phyalin and Isel traded another of their looks. "The bond is already begun," Phyalin said. "It cannot be unbegun, only starved. And a starved bond does not simply fade away. It turns on the two it ties. If he dies of his curse, and he is dying, the bond will drag you down into the dark after him whether your wall still stands or no." She said it without any cruelty, which made it far worse. "You cannot save yourself by staying empty. Not anymore. That door has closed behind you. You can only save yourself now by saving him. Or the two of you go down together. Then tell me how to break his curse." Marin said, "You are the lore master, the wanting. Where does it come from? How is it ended?" For the first time, Phyalin looked away. "Most who carry it are born to it," she said carefully. "It runs in the old blood, a cruelty of birth, and nothing to be done about it. That is what the histories all say." She hesitated a breath too long. "But not all. There are older stories. Stories of the wanting given, and not born, bargained for." Her mouth thinned. "If his is of that kind, then it has a source, and a price, and a thing he has never told a single living soul, and I would not know how to break it, because he has never once let me close enough to ask him." Marin found him that evening, by the marsh wall alone, which he was never permitted to be, watching the light go down red over the water the way it had the night they first summoned her. She did not touch him. She stood beside him at a careful arm's length, the way he always stood beside her, and understood the whole kindness of it at last. "They tell me we are bonding," she said. "They tell me it will kill me if you die." Emeric went very still. She watched the news of it land on him, watched him take it in and understand it fully, and watched, with a slow and sinking dread, exactly what a man like him would choose to do with such a thing. "No," he said softly. He did not look at her. His hands had closed into fists at his sides, the way they did when he wanted to reach for her and would not permit himself. "No, I will not buy my rest with your life. I have taken enough, my whole life long, from people who could not help but give it to me, Emeric. You should go back to the quiet house tonight," he said, and his voice had gone flat and far away. The voice of a man deciding a thing and building a wall of his own around the decision to hold himself to it. "And you should not come back here again." The red light died on the water. And Marin, who 4 short nights ago would have thanked the heavens above for exactly these words, felt the first sob she had allowed herself in all that wild time catch and tear loose in her throat. And she knew, with the awful clarity of the newly and terribly awake, that the wall was well and truly down now, and that it was far too late to save herself by being empty. She went back to the quiet house, because he had ordered it, and because for the whole length of the walk across the dark yard, she still believed she could climb back inside the quiet and pull the lid down after her, the way she always had. She could not. The wall would not go back up. She lay on her old cot in the little room off the washing chamber and waited for the numbness to close over her, familiar and safe and total. And it did not come. In its place came everything at once. The ache of him 200 paces away and forbidden to her, the absence of the marsh tea that would not be brought tonight, nor any night after. And beneath all of it, rising now that there was no wall left to hold it down, the thing she had buried so deep, so that she lay in the dark, and for the first time since a winter road 2 years gone, she let herself think the name Win, and it opened her like a knife, drawn slow. He did not send for her. Of course, he did not. That was the whole cruelty of the man, that he would sooner come apart than spend her to hold himself together. Elsbeth came on the 3rd day, gray in the face, and told her what her own failing body already knew. The beta was not sleeping. Not for a minute now. Not at all. He had ordered Phelan to try every remedy she had set aside months ago, the willow and the poppy and the deep-sea draughts that stopped a heart outright if you misjudged the measure. Anything at all to buy an hour of the dark, and none of it touched the noise. He held himself upright through the days by will alone, and he was graying. Graying, Marin repeated, and noticed then that her own hand had gone thin and pale against the coverlet, the veins standing up dark beneath the skin. His edges, Elspeth whispered. It is the only word any of us have found for it. When the light falls a certain way, he looks like a man you are seeing through water. Phelan says the gray place no longer waits for him to sleep. It is coming for him while he wakes. Her voice cracked clean across. He asks after you every hour, and forbids us to fetch you in the very same breath. He says he will not drag you down with him. He says it as though it were a noble thing. She looked up, weeping and furious. It is not noble. It is only lonely. It is the loneliest thing I have ever watched a living man do to himself. Marin went to him that night. She could not help it. She crossed the yard and climbed the stair to the corridor that had once been cleared for her, and it was thronged again now with the usual desperate crowd of admirers, and 2 of the king's own guards stood before his door with their faces schooled to careful blankness. He gave the order himself, mistress, the elder of them said, not unkindly. None are to admit you. He was most particular on the point. He hesitated, and something in his soldier's face gave way. He made us swear it upon our wolves. I am sorry. I have served him 9 years, and I have never once seen the man beg before tonight. Marin stood in the pressing crowd of every soul that wanted the man behind that door, and understood that she was the only one among all of them he would refuse to let in, precisely because she was the only one who had never once wished to take a single thing from him. She went back down the stair. She could not face her own cold cot, so she went instead into the washing chamber, where the next of the dead lay waiting for her, an old fishwife who had gone quiet in her sleep, and she took up the cloths and the oils because her hands at least still knew a work that asked nothing at all of her heart. But even that had changed on her now. She washed the old woman by candlelight and found herself weeping over a stranger, weeping the way she had never once let herself weep over her own sister, and she understood at last that the wall she had lived behind for so long had not merely fallen down. It had been the one thing holding back a flood years deep, and now the flood had the whole run of her, and every small grief she met poured straight through into the great buried one beneath, and she could find no bottom to any of it. She had believed, once, that to feel nothing was the very worst that a person could be made to suffer. She had been a fool. To feel everything with no wall left and no rest, and the one man who might have helped her carry the weight of it sealed away behind a sworn door, was a great deal worse. And across the dark keep she could feel him, faint and fading down the half-made thread of the bond, and she knew, the way she was learning to know his moods before ever he spoke them, that he was awake as well, and that he could feel her, and that he had weighed her pain against her life, and decided the pain was a price he would gladly pay. The stubborn, self-slaughtering nobility of the man made her want to stand in the yard and scream. That night the pull came for her, and it was not gentle, and it was no longer a thread. It was a hand closing around her ankle in the dark, dragging, and she woke, gasping, with the gray light already bleeding up around the edges of her own small room, the walls going thin as breath, the dawn that never comes reaching up through the floor of the world to take her down after him. Phelan had said it as plainly as anything, and Marin had not truly believed her until this moment. A starved bond does not fade. It turns upon the 2 it ties. She was not being pulled in to save him this time. She was being pulled in to drown at his side. She did not tell Isolde about the hand at her ankle. She did not have to. The old woman found her at first light on the washing chamber floor, where Marin had crawled to hold herself in the waking world by the cold and the hardness of the stone against her cheek, and Isolde took one look at the gray clinging to her apprentice's edges and sent the yard boy running for the Loramaster and the Luna. They laid her out on the long table, where the dead went, because it was the only bed to hand, and Marin thought that was about right, and said so aloud, and no one laughed. "How long?" Phelan said grimly, her fingers pressed to Marin's graying wrist. "Since last night. It has a hold of me now. It pulls even waking." Marin's own voice sounded a long way off to her. "You are right. I cannot save myself by being empty. There is no empty left in me." He filled it up without either of us meaning it. It was then that the wolf came. No one had summoned it. No one living could have. Aymeric had given his order and sworn his guards, and sealed himself behind his door with the whole force of a will that had held him upright and alone for 30 years. But a man's will and a man's wolf are not always the self-same creature, and somewhere in the failing dark, the wolf had made a different choice, and slipped its grieving master, and come. It came across the yard at a dead run, huge and dark and graying at the edges, like everything he now was, and it did not so much as turn its head at the crowd, that gasped and reached and called to it. It came straight through the door of the quiet house, that no living thing willingly entered, and it crossed the cold floor, and it laid its great head up onto the table beside Marin's shoulder, in the exact place its master had once laid his own head, in a crowded hall, and it lay down against her side, and it would not leave. It would not leave. They tried, later, gently, to coax it back to its dying master, and it showed them the length of its teeth and pressed closer, its flank warm along her side, its breath warm against her graying throat, holding her, the only way a wolf knows how, on the near shore of the living world. "Well," said Isolde, very softly, looking at the beast that had crossed a whole room full of people who adored it in order to lie down beside the one woman it could not have and would not leave. "There's your answer, child. If ever you doubted it, his wolf knew before either of you did. His wolf has known the whole while." Marin wept then. She had not wept in 2 years, and now that she had begun, she could not stop, and the wolf pushed its head up under her chin and let her soak its fur and did not move. "I could not save her," she said. The words came up out of the deepest board of the coffin she had built. "Win. She took the fever on the road home, and I did everything. I know every herb there is. I am good at this, Isolde. I am so good at it. And I held her the whole last night, and it was not enough, and she died in my arms all the same. And so I decided." Her voice cracked away to nothing. "I decided that if being good was not enough to save the one person I loved in the world, then I did not deserve to love anyone ever again. So I stopped. I made myself stop wanting. I climbed in beside her, near enough." "I know," said Isolde, holding her. "I have known since the morning you first came to my gate, and if I let him in, and it is not enough a second time." Marin shook her head against the warm fur. "I will not survive it twice, I cannot." "No," Isolde agreed, without flinching, "perhaps you cannot. But you are not surviving this either, are you? This is not the safe road, child. There has never been a safe road. There is only the coffin you have already tried, which is killing you slower, and the man behind that door, who is killing himself by inches, to keep from asking you for the one thing that might yet save the both of you." She took Marin's wet face in her 2 old hands, exactly as Marin had taken his in the gray. "You loved her, and she died, and those are 2 different things, and grief has spent all this while lying in your ear that they are one and the same. Now, his wolf has cast its vote plain enough. What do you say to it?" Marin looked down at the great dark head, resting against her chest, at the loyal dying creature that had refused every want in the whole realm to guard the single silence that it loved. "I say, open the door," she said. "I do not care what he swore, or on what. I say we go over the king's own head, if we must." Elspeth was already gone from the room. She had slipped out unnoticed, the instant the wolf lay down. And when Marin, unsteady on her feet and held up in Isolde's arms, came out into the gray morning, the Luna was already crossing the yard back toward her at speed, and behind her, still dragging his coat straight over his shoulders, his face like a gathering storm and his crown nowhere in sight, came the Alpha King himself. "My beta," Osric said, without preamble or greeting, "is a great fool and my dearest friend, and I have indulged the fool this past year to spare the friend, and I find this morning that I am finished with it." His tired eyes found Marin's graying face, and something in them hardened into resolve. "He swore his guards to keep you out. He did not think to swear me. Come along, mistress. The king is going to go and open a door." The crowd in the corridor scattered before the king like startled birds. Osric did not slow for any of them. He set his own shoulder to his beta's door when the guards fumbled the great bolt and it crashed inward. And Marin, on the king's arm because her own legs would not entirely serve her, saw Emeric for the first time in 4 days. He was on the floor by the cold hearth. He had stopped graying, because there was almost nothing left of him to gray. He was a man, sketched in failing light, thin as a held breath, and when the door burst in, he lifted his head and saw her, and his ruined face did something terrible to behold. "No," he said. "No. Take her out. She cannot be in here. I forbid it." "You forbid," said Osric, and there was 30 years of friendship and fury, both packed into the 2 words. "You are my second, Emeric, not my keeper, and this one time in your long stubborn life, you are going to be overruled." He passed Marin from his own arm into the room the way a man hands across a thing he treasures, and stepped back over the threshold, and drew the broken door closed behind her. Then they were alone together, the 2 of them, and the great wolf that had followed her up the stair, and now lay itself down between them and the door, as though to bar the road to any second thought of parting. "You should never have come," he said. His voice was a wreck of itself. He had dragged his body up against the hearthstones. "I gave that order so that you would live. Do you understand what it is you are doing? If you bind yourself to me, and I go down into the gray, and I do not come back up, it takes you as well. I have watched myself dying for a year, Marin. I will not lie here and watch it take you too." "Then do not die," Marin said. "I do not know how to stop it. I know you do not." She crossed the room to him. She was graying, and he was fading, and neither of them was steady on their feet, and she went down to her knees in front of him on the cold stone and took his face in both her hands, the way she had in the gray country, the way his own wolf had shown her was the truest thing she had ever owned. "That is why I have come. You have spent your whole life being wanted by everyone alive and known by no one at all, and somewhere along the way you decided that being known was a thing you would simply never be allowed to keep. And I spent those same years deciding that I would never be allowed to feel again. We are the same creature, you and I. We are 2 people who bricked ourselves up alive because we were each so certain that we did not deserve the door." Her thumbs moved slow across his cheekbones. "And I am so tired, Emeric, of the door being locked." He made a sound, low and broken open. His hand came up and covered hers against his cheek. At last, and it was the very first time he had ever once let himself reach for her, and she felt the whole of a lifetime of held-back wanting, shaking in it. "I have wanted you from the first hour," he said. "I, who am wanted by all the world. I did not believe I was permitted to. You made no noise, and in the quiet of you, I heard my own heart beating for the first time in my life, and it was saying your name, and I thought, of all the cruelties I have been dealt, this is surely the worst of them. That I should finally come to love, and that it should cost the one I love her life." "Then let it cost me," Marin said. "It is mine to spend as I please. I have been saving it up a long time, and I choose to spend it on you." And she kissed him. He kissed her back like a man breaking the surface of deep water after far too long in the dark, and she kissed him like a woman climbing at long last, up out of a coffin she had lain in far too long. His arms came around her at last, careful even now, and hers wound around his neck, and the faithful hand's width of air he had kept between them, for weeks closed to nothing at all. He held her as though she were the first warm and living thing he had ever been allowed to keep, and she held him just as fiercely. And the dying fire kept its own gentle counsel, and the great wolf laid its head upon its paws, and let the two of them have their peace. She felt the bond seal. It did not click shut like a lock, as Phelan had promised her it would. It broke open like a dawn. One moment, she was Marin, alone inside the walled dark she had built with her own two hands. And the next, there was a warmth unspooling gold and endless from somewhere behind her ribs, running out along a thread that led straight into him. And she felt him on the far end of it, the whole of him. And beneath that ache, small and stubborn and blazing, the thing that had only ever been hers. He felt her in the same breath. She knew it, because he wept, this enormous and dangerous man, and pressed his brow hard to hers, and breathed her name like the first true word he had ever been given. The graying was gone from her hands. The fading had left his edges. Wherever the bond ran bright between them, the gray light of the dying could find no purchase at all. Afterward, he slept. He slept the way she had first seen him sleep in the crowded hall, deep and safe and impossibly at peace, his slow heart beating under her ear, his heavy arms certain around her, as though he had held her so every night of both their lives. The fire warmed the room, the wolf kept the door, and Marin lay in the arms of the most wanted man in the realm, bonded and whole and no longer empty, and felt the one thing she had sworn she would never again risk feeling. She felt hope. The whole future stretched away ahead of her in the dark, bright and wide and possible, and she let her eyes drift closed upon it and slept. She woke in the gray, not at its edge this time, not walking untouched through its blind and reaching crowd. This time, the sealing of the bond had thrown the door wide open, and it had pulled her all the way in, down to the very heart of the gray country, down to where the wanting ran thickest and oldest and hungriest, down to where Emmerich knelt in the center of it all, as he had knelt every night of his cursed and lonely life. And this time she understood, with a slow and dreadful certainty settling into her bones, that pulling him out of it was never once going to be enough, because he was not being held here, he was holding on. The crowd was worse at the heart of it than it had ever been at the edge. Here the faceless reachers pressed so thickly they were nearly one single body, one vast and blind and endless hunger, and their murmur was no longer made of words, but of one low, unbroken tone that Marin felt down in the roots of her teeth, and in the one small clear space, at the very center of all of it, knelt Emmerich, and here, in the country that was killing him, he did not fade. Here he was more solid and more real than she had ever once seen him in the waking world, as though this gray and terrible place were the single country where he truly believed that he belonged, Emmerich. She went to him through the crowd that could not see her. She knelt down before him. She took his face in her hands. "I have you. Get up. This time we go together." "I cannot." He did not fight her hands, but neither did he rise. "You keep pulling me out, and I keep coming back, because this is where I am owed. You do not know what it is that I did. If you knew it, you would let the crowd have me, you would stand there beside them, and you would agree." "Then, show me," Marin said. "I have washed 1,000 of the dead, and there is nothing left in this whole world that can turn my stomach anymore. Show me the very worst of you." And so he did. The gray country shifted around the two of them, the way places will shift in dreams, and then they were somewhere far older. A cold hollow set among standing stones, weeping with damp, the kind of place the country folk called a bargaining ground, and crossed themselves to pass by. And in the middle of the hollow there stood a boy. Marin knew him at once, though he could not have been more than 9 years of age. She knew the set of those small shoulders already braced hard against a world that would not turn to look at him. He was a plain and overlooked little thing, this boy, the runt of some great wolf's proud litter, and Marin felt the whole truth of him come pouring down the bond in a flood. A mother who could never quite meet his eyes. A father who forgot his name between one day and the next. An entire pack that looked over him and around him and clean through him as though he were nothing more than a cold draft under a door, all the days of his small life, until the loneliness grown up inside him was the only thing about him that carried any weight at all. An old woman sat waiting among the stones. Marin did not need anyone to tell her what she was. He came to old Nesca at the Weeping Stones, Emmerich said, from beside her, his grown voice gone flat, with a lifetime of loathing turned inward, and he asked her to make the whole world want him. Because he was 9 years old, and no living soul had ever once wanted him, and he thought, in the whole hoping foolish heart of him, that to be wanted must surely be the very same thing as to be loved. Marin watched the crone lean down close to the boy. She watched her name, the price of it, plainly, and without any cruelty, the same clear way that Phelan named hard things, to be wanted by all and known by none, to draw every eye alive, and to hold not one single heart, to have the noise, forever, standing in the place of the one thing he was truly starving for. And she watched the boy, 9 years old, and drowning in a loneliness that no child should ever be made to carry, look up and say yes. "There," said Emmerich, "there it is, the whole of it. I was not cursed by any enemy. I was not struck down defending the innocent. I did this to myself. I sold every true thing I might ever have had in this life, out of vanity, out of a small child's greed to be adored, and the gray place is only the bill of it come due, every night, forever, and rightly so. So now you see." He turned and looked at her, and his eyes were still the boy's eyes, and always had been. "I do not deserve to be pulled out of here. I deserve to kneel. I have always known it. That is the reason the curse can hold me, the way it holds no other soul, so long it is not holding on to me at all. Marin, I am the one holding on." And the crowd pressed closer, hungry and agreeing. Marin looked at the boy among the stones for a long moment. Then she rose to her feet, and she turned upon the grown man kneeling before her, and there was something in her now that had not lived in her for 2 long years. Something with real heat in it. Something fiercely and unmistakably alive. "He was 9, she said. Marin. He was 9 years old, and he was so unloved that a little child decided being merely wanted was the very best that he would ever be allowed to have. And you have spent 30 years since punishing that little boy for the terrible crime of not wishing to be lonely for one more single day." Her voice broke, and she let it break. "You did not sell anything, Emmerich. A starving child reached out and took the only bread that anyone had ever offered him. That is not greed. That is grief. I, of all people, know the difference between the two. I have been eating the wrong bread myself for 2 whole years." He only stared up at her. "I told myself I did not deserve to feel again, because I had not been able to save my sister," she said. "You told yourself you did not deserve to ever be known, because once, as a small child, you had dared to want to be loved. We are the same, you and I. We are 2 people kneeling in the dark, agreeing with the very thing that is devouring us. Because agreeing feels a little like justice, and justice feels like the one thing we can still hold on to when everything else has gone." She went back down to her knees before him, before the boy still living inside him. "But it is not justice at all. It is only grief, wearing a judge's stolen face. And I am so tired, my love. I am so unspeakably tired of kneeling here." She reached past the grown man to the boy among the stones. She held out her open hand to the 9-year-old who had only ever wanted one single person to look at him and truly mean it. "You were allowed to have wanted that," she said to the child. "It was never once a crime. You did not deserve any of this, not one gray hour of it. Come here to me. Let me look at you properly. I see you, not the noise of you. You." For a long, long moment, the boy only stared at her outstretched hand, unable to believe in it, exactly the way that she herself had disbelieved every kindness ever offered to her. and then he took it. Emmerich made a sound that she felt tear through her own chest along the bond, a sound like a great wall coming down, like a coffin lid at last lifting, like a lifetime's held breath finally let go. And he reached out, the grown man did, and he gathered up the boy that he had been into his own arms, and he forgave him, at long last, for the terrible unforgivable sin of having been a lonely little child. She felt it happen through the bond. She felt the agreement break apart inside him. She felt him, finally, stop holding on. The crowd of the faceless wanting made one great and terrible sound, and then, one by one, and then all at once, together, they turned themselves away. They did not dissolve into any black water. They simply stopped their reaching. They lowered their blind and grasping hands, and they turned, and they walked out into the gray, dwindling as they went, going off toward wherever it is that a hunger goes, when the thing it has fed on for so long. The murmur thinned, the gray thinned after it. A wind moved through that place, the first wind Marin had ever felt in all that dead country, and it smelled, faintly and impossibly, of the marsh, and of the tea, and of home. "I have you," Marin whispered, holding the man and the boy, and the whole of him at once. "I have you now. Put it down. You are allowed to put it down." And Emmerich of Velmark, for the first time since he was 9 years old. The curse did not break all at once. Nothing that is true ever does. The wanting did not simply vanish the morning after. It faded, the way a shout fades to an echo and an echo fades to a memory, over weeks, and then over whole seasons. As Emmerich slowly stopped feeding it, his agreement, some days the old noise still rose in him. Some nights the gray still reached up for him, at the very edge of sleep. But it no longer found a man kneeling down in the middle of it, patiently waiting to be taken apart. It found instead a man who turned over and reached for the woman lying beside him, and slept, and she was always lying beside him. They did not make it easy on the court, the two of them. A death tender of no house, made mate to the king's own second, was not the match that the great families had spent long years scheming quietly toward. And the whispers followed Marin down every corridor for a good long while. She found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she did not much care. She had washed and shrouded far too many of the great and the grand to be frightened now of their living opinions. And when a certain duchess said a certain unforgivable thing at a certain feast, it was Emmerich who turned and looked at the woman, only looked, with the full and terrible pull of him aimed for once entirely and deliberately. Until she went the color of old ash and discovered something suddenly urgent to attend to elsewhere. "You are not supposed to use it on purpose," Marin murmured to him. "I am the most wanted man in the whole realm," he said, mild as milk. "It seems a dreadful waste to never once spend it on my wife's behalf. She kept the quiet house. She would not give it up, and he would never have dreamed of asking her to. The dead still came to her, and she still washed them, and closed their eyes and sat with the ones they had left grieving behind. And she was better at the work now than she had ever been, not colder, but warmer. Because a woman who has climbed all the way up out of her own coffin knows the exact shape of the hand to hold out to someone still standing at the edge of theirs. She spoke her sister's name often now. She had planted a marsh rose upon Wynn's plot, and against all good sense it took root there, in the poor wet ground, and it bloomed. On the anniversary of the night his wolf had crossed a crowded hall to lie itself down upon a stranger, Marin woke in the deep middle of the night, and found him already awake, watching her, in the dark, the very way he had that first gray dawn. "Is something wrong?" she said, half asleep still. "No," said Emmerich, "nothing at all. That is the strange part of it. I keep waking to check, and there is only the quiet, and you in the middle of it." His hand found hers beneath the blankets, and their fingers wound together, easy now, worn to the shape of one another. "I spent the whole of my life," he said softly, "being wanted by every soul in the world. And all I ever truly needed was one single person who did not, and who then chose me anyway. Go to sleep, my lord, Marin said, and felt herself smiling into the dark, felt the whole living ache of it, the joy and the grief, and the enormous risk of loving a thing you know that you could lose. You need not entertain the furniture. He laughed. That rough, warm sound, no longer startled by the feel of it in his chest, and the great wolf sighed and settled at the foot of the bed. And the most wanted man in the realm gathered the one woman who had never wanted a single thing from him close against his heart, and closed his eyes, and slept, deep and dreamless and safe, in the only silence he had ever loved.